Hello and welcome to her revenge arc. I am your narrator, and tonight, I invite you to settle in, to dim the lights, and to listen. The story you are about to hear is one of quiet injustices and loud triumphs, of the subtle corrosion of the soul, and the forging of a new one from the pieces left behind. It is a story about the weight of words and the power of actions. It is my story, and it begins not with the bang, but with the mundane, soul-crushing drip of freshly brewed coffee. My world for 5 years smelled of three things: industrial-grade carpet cleaner, the faint, metallic tang of overworked servers, and the expensive dark roast coffee I was required to make every morning for my boss, Mr. Arthur Harrison. I was an analyst, a strategist by title at Harrison Consulting, a mid-sized firm with a reputation for being aggressive, effective, and ruthlessly traditional. I had graduated top of my class, armed with a degree in business strategy, and a mind that saw patterns in market data, the way a composer hears a symphony in silence. When I was hired, I saw a clear path, a ladder of accomplishments I was eager to climb. I didn't realize that some of the rungs were designed to be purely ornamental. My first day, I wore a charcoal gray suit that had cost me nearly a week's salary. It was my armor, a declaration of my seriousness. I sat in the pristine, minimalist lobby, my portfolio resting on my lap, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When Mr. Harrison finally called me in, he didn't shake my hand. He gestured to a chair with a flick of his wrist, his eyes already scanning a document on his desk. He was a man carved from oak and impatience, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched and silver hair swept back with a severity that matched his disposition. "Hilaire Vance," he said, the name sounding foreign and unimportant on his tongue. "Good grades. Impressive internship at Sterling Corporation. They said you were diligent." He said the word diligent as if it were a euphemism for pliable. "I work hard, Mr. Harrison. I'm a dedicated strategist, and I'm eager to contribute to the team." He finally looked at me then, a long, appraising stare that felt less like an evaluation of my professional potential, and more like he was estimating the thread count of my suit. "Good," he grunted. "We value dedication here." He then spent the next 10 minutes outlining the firm's philosophy, which boiled down to a brutal form of corporate Darwinism. The strong survived, the weak were culled, and he, Arthur Harrison, was the apex predator. As he finished, his assistant, a nervous young man named Leo, buzzed in on the intercom. "Mr. Harrison, the delegation from Innovatech is in the main conference room." "Excellent." He stood, smoothing his tie. He looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "All right, Vance. Your first task. The coffee machine in the kitchenette is a bit temperamental. Go make a fresh pot for the meeting. Black 2 sugars on the side. And bring in a tray of water glasses. You'll find everything you need in there." I froze for a fraction of a second. My mind replayed the job description. Develop and implement strategic business solutions. Analyze market trends. Prepare comprehensive reports for C-suite executives. Nowhere did it mention barista duties. But it was my first day. I was the newest, most junior member. It was a form of hazing, perhaps. A test of humility. "Of course, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice betraying none of the acid that had just flooded my stomach. I found the kitchenette, a small windowless room that smelled of stale microwave popcorn. The coffee machine was indeed a complex beast of stainless steel and cryptic buttons. As I fumbled with the filters and grounds, my charcoal gray armor began to feel like a costume. I could hear the muffled sounds of introductions and laughter from the conference room down the hall, the place I was supposed to be, the place my degree had promised me. I arranged the cups on a tray, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt deep inside. When I carried the tray into the conference room, the conversation didn't pause. Mr. Harrison gave me a curt nod, the kind one gives to a waiter, and I backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind me, leaving my ambitions on the other side of the polished wood. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a fluke, a first-day chore. I was wrong. It became a pattern, a quiet, insidious part of my daily routine. The coffee was just the beginning. The next week, Mr. Harrison stopped me as I was heading to a brainstorming session for the Sterling Corp account, a legacy client I was desperate to work on. "Vance," he called out, not looking up from his computer. "I need you to handle something. My wife's birthday is next week. Book a table at a nice restaurant, something with a view, and order a bouquet of lilies to be sent to the office. White ones. Use the company card." I stood there, my notebook in hand, ready to dissect quarterly earnings reports. Mark, a fellow analyst who had started 6 months before me, walked past, giving me a quick, pitying glance before disappearing into the meeting room. Mr. Harrison, I started, trying to keep my tone even. I was just about to join the Sterling meeting. I've prepared a preliminary analysis of their competitor's new campaign that I think would be. He finally looked up, his expression one of mild irritation, as if a fly were buzzing near his ear. Mark can handle the meeting. This is important. It requires a certain touch. He gave me a thin, condescending smile. You know, women's work. There it was. The phrase. Uttered so casually, so thoughtlessly, it was like a slap I couldn't react to. Women's work. It hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just about booking a table or ordering flowers. It was a definition. A box. He had looked at my resume, at my qualifications, at my ambition, and all he had seen was my gender, a convenient peg on which to hang the tasks he deemed beneath him and the other men in the office. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with restaurants and florists, the language of market share and ROI replaced by discussions of prix-fixe menus and vase arrangements. I could hear the animated voices from the conference room, the sounds of strategy being forged, of careers being built. My own career, it seemed, was being built on a foundation of floral foam and reservation confirmations. This became the new normal. While Mark and the other male analysts were given challenging accounts, sent on client-facing trips, and encouraged to lead presentations, I was assigned the office's administrative and emotional labor. I planned the annual holiday party, a logistical nightmare of dietary restrictions and budget constraints. I was tasked with remembering everyone's birthdays and circulating a card, a job that earned me the cloying nickname Office Sunshine from some of the older partners. I was the designated note-taker in every meeting I was actually allowed to attend, my own strategic insights silenced by the frantic scratching of my pen as I documented the ideas of others. The most painful part was my own complicity. I was young, afraid of being labeled difficult or not a team player. So I did the work. I did it with a forced smile and a terrifying efficiency. I organized the best holiday parties the firm had ever seen. The flowers for Mrs. Harrison were always breathtaking. The coffee was always perfect. I told myself I was proving my competence, that if I could handle these menial tasks with grace, they would surely see I was capable of more. It was a fool's hope. My efficiency didn't earn me respect. It simply made me indispensable in a role I never wanted. My mind, the one that saw symphonies in data, was slowly being starved. I would finish my women's work for the day and then stay late, long after everyone else had gone home. The office was quiet then, transformed from a place of public humiliation to a private sanctuary. Under the sterile glow of the overhead fluorescent lights, I would pull up the files for the accounts I wasn't assigned to. I'd run my own analyses on Sterling Corp's declining market share. I'd build my own strategic frameworks for Innovatech's chaotic expansion. I'd study the donor engagement data for our biggest nonprofit client, the Evergreen Foundation, identifying patterns of attrition that no one else seemed to notice. I lived a double life. By day, I was Lara Vance, the glorified assistant. By night, I was Lara Vance, the strategist. I compiled my findings into detailed, unsolicited reports. At first, I would leave them on Mr. Harrison's desk, hoping he would see the work, see the value, see me. The first time I did this, with a deep dive into Innovatech's supply chain vulnerabilities, he didn't mention it for 3 days. Then, on a Thursday morning, he called me into his office. Hope, a stupid, stubborn thing, fluttered in my chest. He was holding my report. "This," he said, tapping it with a thick finger. "Where did you get the time to do this?" "I worked on it in the evenings, sir. I noticed some discrepancies in their logistics reports and I thought." He cut me off. "You thought?" He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "What you thought was that your time was better spent on this than on the tasks I assigned you. Did you remember to reorder the toner for the third-floor printer?" "Yes, sir. It arrived this morning." "And the catering for the lunch meeting tomorrow?" "Confirmed. Vegan and gluten-free options included." "Good." He tossed my report into the trash bin beside his desk. It landed with a soft final thud. "Stick to your own duties, Vance. The men will handle the real strategy. It's better that way. Less complicated." I stared at the bin. 20 hours of my life, of my passion, of my expertise, were lying crumpled next to a banana peel and a used coffee cup. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a terrifying, hollow clarity. He wasn't just overlooking my potential. He was actively trying to extinguish it. My ambition wasn't an asset to him. It was an inconvenience, a violation of the natural order as he saw it. From that day on, I stopped leaving reports on his desk. But I didn't stop writing them. I saved them to a personal encrypted hard drive. I continued my nocturnal work, but now it was for an audience of one. It was an act of defiance, a way of keeping a part of myself alive. Each report was a brick. I didn't know what I was building, but I laid each one with meticulous care. The other men in the office, like Mark, were mostly bystanders. Mark was a decent person, I think. He'd sometimes apologize in a hushed tone after Harrison had been particularly egregious. "Sorry about that, Alara. He's just old-fashioned." He'd say it while I was wiping down the counter after a meeting he had just led. His sympathy was a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound. It cost him nothing and changed nothing for me. In a way, his passive kindness was more infuriating than Harrison's overt sexism. It acknowledged the injustice but refused to challenge it, leaving me utterly alone in my fight. My relationship with our clients was by necessity distant. I was the person who emailed them to confirm meeting times or asked about their coffee preferences. But I studied them from afar. I learned the name of the CEO of Sterling Corp's daughter, because I had to send a graduation gift. I knew the CTO of Innovatech was a cycling enthusiast, because I had to research corporate retreat locations that included bike trails. I knew the director of the Evergreen Foundation was deeply passionate about wetland conservation, because I had to order a specialty book on the topic for her as a holiday present. I was the firm's memory, its repository of personal humanizing details that Harrison and his team of real strategists deemed irrelevant. They saw clients as revenue streams. Thanks to my women's work, I was beginning to see them as people. The turning point, the moment the quiet coldness inside me finally began to heat into something sharp and purposeful, came during what should have been my greatest triumph. It involved Sterling Corp, our oldest and most prestigious client. They were a legacy brand, a manufacturer of high-end leather goods, and they were in trouble. A new, more agile online competitor was eating their lunch, and Sterling's traditional print-heavy marketing strategy was failing spectacularly. Harrison and his team had been throwing strategies at the problem for 6 months, all with dismal results. They were suggesting bigger ad buys, celebrity endorsements, things that showed they didn't understand the fundamental shift in the market. From my hidden vantage point, I saw the problem clearly. Sterling wasn't just selling handbags. They were selling heritage, craftsmanship, a story. Their digital presence was a ghost town, and their social media was a joke. I spent a month of late nights crafting a comprehensive, 360-degree, digital transformation strategy. It was the most complex and elegant piece of work I had ever produced. It integrated targeted social media storytelling, a complete website overhaul focused on the artisan process, and a data-driven influencer campaign that focused on micro-influencers in the sustainable fashion space. It was beautiful. It was smart. And it was going to save their asses. The problem was how to get it in front of anyone. Leaving it on Harrison's desk was a guaranteed trip to the trash can. I needed another way. The opportunity came in the form of a crisis. Sterling Corp CEO, a stern, no-nonsense man named Mr. Davies, called an emergency meeting. He was threatening to pull the account, a move that would have crippled our firm. Harrison was in a panic. The meeting was in 2 hours, and his team had nothing new to offer. The atmosphere in the office was thick with dread. I saw my chance. It was a massive gamble. I went to Mark. I found him staring bleakly at a whiteboard covered in failed ideas. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "I have a plan. A complete digital strategy for Sterling. It's finished. And it will work." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my tablet and showed him the executive summary. He scrolled through it, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock, to a dawning reluctant admiration. "My God, Alara, this is brilliant. Why haven't you shown this to Harrison?" "You know why," I said simply. He looked away, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. "Yeah, I know. I can't present this," I said. "He'll never let me in the room. But you can." The moral calculus was happening right there on his face. He knew it was my work. He also knew it was their only shot. His ambition warred with his conscience. Ambition won, as it so often does. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, give it to me. I'll tell him I pulled an all-nighter." I transferred the files to him. I walked him through the key talking points, the data backing up my conclusions, the answers to the questions I anticipated Mr. Davies would ask. I was the director and he was my actor. For an hour I poured 5 years of suppressed knowledge and a month of intense work into his brain. He was a quick study, I'll give him that. When he walked into the conference room with Mr. Harrison, I retreated to my desk. I was told to stand by in case they needed coffee refills. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, listening to the muffled sounds of Mark's voice. My voice. My strategy. He was hitting all the points. I could hear the initial skepticism from the Sterling team, then the intrigued questions, then the shift in tone to one of excitement. 2 hours later the door opened. Mr. Harrison emerged, his face split by a grin I had never seen before. He was clapping Mark on the back, laughing. Mr. Davies followed, looking relieved for the first time in months. He shook Mark's hand vigorously. "Outstanding work, young man," Davies said. "Truly outstanding. You've not only saved the account, you've given us a future." Mark was beaming, soaking in the praise. He caught my eye over Mr. Harrison's shoulder. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, I suppose. Or an apology." It was hard to tell. I felt a dizzying mix of pride and rage. My strategy had worked. The validation was exquisite, but the fact that it was being delivered to the wrong address was a fresh and profound kind of agony. The team decided to go out for an impromptu celebration at a nearby bar. The air was electric with relief and victory. As everyone was packing up, grabbing their coats, Mr. Harrison strode over to my desk. "This is it," I thought. "He knows." Mark told him. "He's going to acknowledge my work." The stupid, stubborn hope flared again. He beamed at me. "Vance. Great news. Mark's phenomenal presentation just saved our largest account." "I heard, sir." "That's wonderful." "It is," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The team is heading out to celebrate. We'll probably be a few hours." He then gestured vaguely at the conference room, where the remnants of the tense meeting used coffee cups, scattered papers, a half-eaten plate of pastries still lay. "Be a good girl and tidy up in there before you leave, would you? We'll need it clean for the morning." He paused, then added with a paternalistic pat on my shoulder, "That's women's work after all. And you're so good at it." He turned and walked away, joining the laughing, jubilant crowd heading for the elevators. I stood there, motionless, as the office emptied out. The sound of their fading laughter echoed in the cavernous space. I looked at my desk, at my computer, and then at the conference room. He hadn't just stolen my work. He hadn't just given the credit to someone else. He had, in the moment of my greatest professional achievement, reduced me once again to the role of the cleaning lady. He had made me sweep up the confetti from a parade held in my honor, a parade I wasn't invited to attend. I walked slowly into the conference room. The large mahogany table was littered with the evidence of my invisible victory. I saw the presentation slides on the screen, my graphs, my charts, my words. And on the table, the dirty cups and plates. I stood in the center of the room and I didn't feel anger anymore. The hollow space inside me had been filled with something hard and dense, like a diamond forming under immense pressure. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that it became clarifying. It burned away all the fear, all the hope for his approval, all the carefully constructed justifications for my own passivity. I did not clean the room. I walked back to my desk. I didn't pack up my personal belongings, the single photo of my parents, the small succulent plant. They were casualties of a war I was about to declare. I took only one thing, my encrypted hard drive, the one with all my real work, the bricks I had been laying for years. I went into Mr. Harrison's empty office. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne and self-satisfaction. I placed my company ID and my office key in the very center of his large, uncluttered desk. Next to them, I laid a single, handwritten note on a piece of company letterhead. It contained only 3 words. "I am done." Then I walked out of Harrison Consulting for the last time. I didn't look back. The front door clicked shut behind me, and in the sudden silence of the evening, I felt not fear, but a profound and exhilarating sense of freedom. The verdict was in. My sentence was over, and the real work was about to begin. The first 24 hours of my new life were a terrifying silent void. The adrenaline of my departure had worn off, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of my situation. I was unemployed. I had a mortgage payment due in 3 weeks. My savings were respectable but not infinite. I had walked away from a steady paycheck in a care-era toxic, soul-destroying career, but a career nonetheless with nothing but a hard drive full of unrealized plans and a 3-word resignation note. I spent the first day in my small apartment, moving from room to room as if I were a ghost. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For 5 years, my days had been structured by Mr. Harrison's demands, by the rhythmic cycle of coffee, condescension, and clandestine work. Now there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Fear, a cold and practical emotion, began to set in. Had I been rash? Had I let one final humiliation torpedo my entire future? I sat on my sofa, the encrypted hard drive resting on the coffee table like a sacred artifact. I plugged it into my personal laptop and opened the files. I scrolled through them one by one. The Sterling Corp digital strategy, the Innovatech supply chain analysis, the Evergreen Foundation donor retention plan. Years of my best thinking, my sharpest insights, all hidden away. They were more than just reports. They were proof of my value. A value that had been systematically denied. Looking at them, the fear began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of purpose. I hadn't just walked away from something. I had walked towards this. This hard drive was the foundation. My note to Harrison hadn't been a resignation. It had been a declaration of independence. I spent the next week in a fever of creation. My apartment became my command center. The dining table was buried under legal pads, flowcharts, and business plan templates. I lived on coffee me own, brewed exactly how I liked it in toast. I drained a significant portion of my savings to register a business, secure a domain name, and pay a freelance designer for a logo and a simple, elegant website. I needed a name for my company. I toyed with dozens of options, most of them generic corporate-sounding names. Nothing felt right. They felt like echoes of Harrison Consulting, like I was trying to build a smaller version of his world. I wanted something different, something that spoke to my journey. One evening, staring at my reflection in the dark window of my living room, it came to me. Clarity. It was what I offered clients, and it was what I had finally found for myself. Clarity Consulting. It was simple, clean, and confident. It was everything Harrison Consulting was not. With the company legally formed and a website live, the real challenge began. I had no clients. I was a one-woman operation with a beautiful logo and an empty portfolio. My work for Sterling, Innovatech, and Evergreen was technically the intellectual property of Harrison Consulting. I couldn't just slap it on my website, but I knew that work inside and out. More importantly, I knew the weaknesses in Harrison's operation. His firm was built on his reputation, but the day-to-day work was carried out by a team he barely managed and fundamentally disrespected. He was a great salesman but a terrible listener. He sold prepackaged solutions, forcing clients' unique problems into his rigid frameworks. He dismissed the small human details as fluff, the very details I had been forced to master. That was his vulnerability, and that was my way in. I decided to start with Sterling Corporation. It was the biggest risk but also the biggest potential reward. I couldn't approach them directly as a former Harrison employee who had just quit. The non-compete clause in my contract was ironclad for a year. But the clause had a loophole, as most do. It prevented me from soliciting their business, but it didn't prevent me from publishing my own thought leadership. It didn't prevent Mr. Davies from finding me. I spent the next 2 weeks transforming my deep dive strategy for Sterling into a series of brilliant, insightful articles and a comprehensive white paper on the challenges facing legacy luxury brands in the digital age. I didn't mention Sterling Corp by name, but every word was tailored to Mr. Davies. I used industry-specific language, referenced market trends I knew he was worried about, and proposed solutions that were a more refined, more elegant version of the strategy Mark had presented. I was speaking to him in code, a language only he would fully understand. I published the articles on my new website's blog and on LinkedIn. I paid to promote them, targeting a ridiculously niche audience. C-suite executives, aged 50 to 65, in the high-end retail sector, located within a 50-mile radius of Sterling Corp's headquarters. It cost me a small fortune in advertising fees, but I was betting my entire future on it. For a week there was nothing. Just the slow trickle of a few likes and comments from strangers. The silence was deafening. I refreshed my email 100 times a day. I watched my bank account dwindle. The fear came roaring back, this time with friends. Self-doubt and regret. Maybe this was all a grandiose fantasy. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe I was just a girl who was good at ordering flowers. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple. Intriguing article. The sender was Charles Davies, CEO of Sterling Corp. My heart stopped. I read the email 3 times to make sure it was real. He said he had come across my white paper, and found it to be one of the most insightful analyses of his industry he had ever read. He noted with polite corporate curiosity that my thinking seemed remarkably aligned with the new direction his company was taking. He asked if I would be open to a brief, informal chat. I stared at the screen, a giddy, triumphant laugh bubbling up from my chest. He had heard me. He had understood the code. I scheduled the call for 2 days later, giving myself time to prepare. This was not a job interview. This was a meeting of equals. I was no longer Lara Vance, the note-taker. I was the founder and principal strategist of Clarity Consulting. I spent the next 48 hours preparing as if I were going to war. I researched every new development at Sterling. I refined my talking points. I even bought a new blazer, not an armor-like suit, but a beautifully tailored jacket in a deep sapphire blue. Felt like my skin. The video call was the most terrifying and exhilarating 15 minutes of my life. Mr. Davies was exactly as I remembered him from a distance. Stern, impatient, and razor-sharp. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Vance," he began, his face a granite mask on my laptop screen. "Your analysis is impressive. So impressive, in fact, that it bears a striking resemblance to a strategy that was presented to my board a few weeks ago by a young man from Harrison Consulting." My blood ran cold. This was it. The accusation. I took a breath, holding his gaze through the small dot of the camera. "Mr. Davies, my work is my own. I have been developing these theories about the digital evolution of heritage brands for years. If my independent analysis aligns with your company's new direction, it simply proves that the strategy is a sound one, based on a clear and accurate reading of the market." I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I stated it as a fact. He was silent for a long moment, studying me. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was a shrewd man. He had seen Mark, young and nervous, presenting a strategy of a depth that perhaps seemed inconsistent with his experience. He had seen Harrison, smug and triumphant. Now he was seeing me, a woman he only knew as the person who confirmed his meeting times, speaking with an authority that was absolute. He was connecting the dots. "Harrison never mentioned you," he said, a statement, not a question. "My official role involved a great deal of administrative support for senior partners," I said carefully. "But I made it a priority to conduct my own strategic analyses on my own time. I believe good ideas can come from anywhere." A slow, wry smile touched the corners of his mouth. It transformed his entire face. "I see," he said, the two words carrying a universe of meaning. He understood completely. He understood the theft, the erasure, the entire pathetic, infuriating dynamic. "Well, Ms. Vance, the problem with the strategy we were presented is that it was just a plan. A slide deck. Execution is everything, and frankly, I've had my doubts about Harrison's ability to navigate the nuances of the digital world. He still thinks social media is for teenagers." He leaned forward slightly. "My contract with Harrison Consulting is up for renewal in 1 month. I am exploring other options. Your firm is new. It's small, but your thinking is not. I'd like to see a formal proposal." And just like that, the world shifted on its axis. The game was on. I spent the next month in a state of sustained high-pressure focus. We exchanged documents. I built a detailed, phased proposal that was light years beyond what Harrison could ever conceive of. It was agile, data-driven, and centered on the authentic storytelling he had always dismissed. I wasn't just offering a marketing plan. I was offering a new philosophy, a new way for Sterling to connect with its customers. I was offering clarity. The day Sterling Corp's contract with Harrison Consulting expired, my phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. "Ms. Vance," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Welcome aboard. We're terminating our relationship with Harrison, effective immediately. Your proposal has been approved by the board. Let's get to work." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated victory. I had done it. I had won back my own work, my own ideas. My first client was Harrison's biggest and oldest. The news of Sterling Corp's departure hit Harrison Consulting like an earthquake. I heard through the industry grapevine that Harrison was blindsided, furious. He had called Mr. Davies, shouting, demanding an explanation. Mr. Davies, from what I was told, had calmly replied that he had chosen to go with the firm that offered a more modern and insightful perspective. He never mentioned my name. He didn't have to. My second target was Innovatech. They were the opposite of Sterling Corp. a chaotic, fast-growing tech startup that was constantly on the verge of either becoming a billion-dollar unicorn or imploding. Harrison had won their business by promising to bring discipline and structure to their operations. In reality, he was stifling their creative energy with rigid, outdated processes. I knew their biggest pain point wasn't a lack of structure, but a lack of flexible, scalable systems. My clandestine analysis of their supply chain was my way in. I also knew from my women's work that their CTO, a brilliant but overworked woman named Priya Sharma, was the real decision-maker, and that Harrison consistently patronized her, often directing his comments to her male subordinates in meetings. This time I didn't need to rely on blog posts. The Sterling Corp announcement had given me credibility. It was my calling card. I reached out to Priya directly with a simple, confident email. I introduced Clarity Consulting as a new, agile strategy firm that had just been retained by Sterling Corp to lead their digital transformation. I mentioned that I specialized in helping high-growth companies scale their operations without sacrificing their innovative culture. I attached a short 2-page memo on the innovator's dilemma, scaling while staying agile. It was a miniature version of the work I had done on her company. She responded in under an hour. "This is interesting. How did you know this is the exact conversation I had with my team yesterday?" We met for coffee the following week. Priya was sharp, direct, and had no time for nonsense. She was exhausted by Harrison's condescension and his one-size-fits-all solutions. "He treats me like a child who needs her homework checked," she told me, stirring her espresso with furious energy. "He keeps trying to fit us into a box that was built in 1995. We're not a box. We're a goddamn rocket ship, and he's trying to tie it down with twine." I didn't badmouth Harrison. I didn't need to. I just listened. I asked questions. I showed her I understood her challenges on a granular level. I spoke her language, the language of scalable tech, of agile development, of building a culture that attracts and retains top talent. What Harrison sees as chaos, I told her, I see as energy. The goal isn't to tame it. It's to build a riverbank so that energy can flow in a powerful and productive direction. She looked at me, a long, appraising look. "You get it," she said, a small, wondrous smile on her face. "You actually get it." 2 weeks later, Innovatech broke their contract with Harrison Consulting, paying a hefty penalty to do so, and signed with Clarity Consulting. The rocket ship now had a new navigator. The tremors at Harrison Consulting were becoming a seismic event. Losing one major client could be explained away as a fluke. Losing two in the span of 2 months to a brand new firm run by a woman he used to send on coffee runs, that was a pattern. That was a story. And the story was spreading. My final target was the Evergreen Foundation. This one was personal. They were a large environmental nonprofit, doing crucial work in conservation. Harrison had taken them on as a pro bono client, a move that was less about altruism and more about the prestige of having them on his roster. He treated them like a charity case, assigning their account to junior staff and giving them recycled, uninspired fundraising strategies. From my time ordering books and researching their pet causes, I knew the director, Dr. Alastair Finch, was a deeply passionate, brilliant biologist who was forced to spend most of his time worrying about donor retention. I knew Harrison's firm was failing him. My hidden analysis had revealed a simple, devastating fact. While they were good at acquiring new donors, their communication with existing ones was terrible, leading to a massive drop-off after the first year. They were pouring water into a leaky bucket. This time I didn't have to make the first move. Dr. Finch contacted me. He had heard about my work with Sterling and Innovatech. He was intrigued by my firm's name, Clarity. "Mr. Harrison's firm gives us complexity," he said on our first call, his voice gentle but weary. "They give us binders full of data we don't have the staff to implement. They give us fundraising strategies that feel slick, inauthentic. We are scientists and conservationists, Ms. Vance. We are trying to save forests, not sell used cars. We need clarity. We need a story." I felt a deep resonance with this man. He, too, was a victim of Harrison's inability to listen. I spent an hour on the phone with him, not talking about strategy but about the foundation's work. I asked him about the specific wetland projects he was passionate about. I asked him about the challenges of communicating complex scientific issues to a lay audience. Then I laid out my vision. It was simple. I proposed we stop focusing on aggressive acquisition and instead build a community around their existing donors. We would use authentic storytelling, videos from the field, letters from the scientists, real impact reports to make donors feel like partners in the mission, not just walking ATMs. "Mr. Harrison's team sends out a generic holiday card," I told him. We're going to send a personalized video message from the research station in the Amazon, showing exactly what last year's donation helped to build. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. My dear Ms. Vance, Dr. Finch said, his voice thick with emotion. When can you start? The Evergreen Foundation leaving was the final blow. They weren't the biggest client in terms of revenue, they were pro bono, after all, but they were the heart of Harrison Consulting's carefully curated image of prestige. Losing them wasn't a financial hit. It was a reputational one. It was a moral failure. Within 3 months of leaving, I had systematically and surgically poached Arthur Harrison's 3 most significant clients. I hadn't badmouthed him. I hadn't engaged in corporate espionage. I had simply listened. I had offered the expertise he had tried to bury. I had built a better company by being a better strategist. My women's work, the listening, the remembering of details, the empathy had turned out to be my most potent weapon. Clarity Consulting was no longer just me in my apartment. I had to hire a small team. I leased a beautiful light-filled office space in a converted warehouse downtown, with exposed brick and huge windows. The first piece of furniture I bought was a state-of-the-art espresso machine, and everyone on my team was taught how to use it. One afternoon about 6 months after I started, my new assistant buzzed me. Her name was Chloe, and she was a whip-smart recent graduate I was mentoring to be a strategist. Elara, she said, her voice hesitant. There's a Mr. Harrison here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. My heart didn't leap. It didn't pound. It settled into a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. Send him in, Chloe, I said calmly. The man who walked into my office looked smaller than I remembered. The oaken impatience frame seemed to have shrunk. The shoulders slumped under the weight of his expensive but now slightly too large suit. The permanent clench in his jaw had been replaced by a slack, defeated line. He looked around my office, the bustling open-plan workspace visible through the glass wall, at the whiteboard covered in my own strategic frameworks, at the view of the city skyline from my window. His eyes, when they finally landed on me, were a toxic cocktail of fury, bewilderment, and a desperation I had never seen in him before. I didn't stand up. I remained seated behind my large, clean desk, my hands resting calmly on its surface. The power dynamic, which for 5 years had been a steep, unassailable cliff with him at the top, had now inverted so completely it was almost dizzying. He was in my space. He was the supplicant. Vance, he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He didn't seem to know what to call me. Ms. Vance felt too formal, too respectful. Elara was too familiar. So he landed on the name he'd always used, the one that had always been a tool of subjugation. But now it sounded weak, hollow. Mr. Harrison, I replied, my tone perfectly level, betraying nothing. To what do I owe the pleasure? He took a stumbling step forward. This. All of this. He waved a hand vaguely at my office, at my success. What did you do? It was a genuine question. In his mind, this was an impossible outcome. It was a violation of the laws of his universe. Women made coffee. Men made deals. Women cleaned up conference rooms. Men saved accounts. The idea that the woman he'd assigned to those menial tasks had not only built her own firm but had dismantled his in the process was a short circuit in his brain. He couldn't compute it. He needed an explanation that fit his worldview. I must have cheated. I must have stolen something more than clients. What did I do? I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. I let him stand there in the uncomfortable silence, watching him squirm. For 5 years he had been the master of uncomfortable silences, using them to intimidate and belittle. I had learned from the best. I did the work, Mr. Harrison, I said finally, my voice soft but carrying the weight of truth. The real work. The work you paid me for but never allowed me to do. He shook his head, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. You were a junior analyst. You were taking notes. You were planning parties. That's what you saw, I countered. While I was planning parties, I was also studying your clients' deepest frustrations. While I was taking notes, I was identifying the gaps in your strategies. While I was ordering your wife's birthday flowers, I was learning the human details you always dismissed as irrelevant. You thought you were assigning me women's work. But what you were really doing, Mr. Harrison, was giving me the keys to your kingdom. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The fury in his eyes was being replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension. He was finally seeing the chessboard, not just his own pieces. Sterling Davies would never have left. We had them for 20 years. You had them for 20 years, I corrected him gently. And in that time you never once bothered to understand the digital world that was threatening to make them obsolete. You sold them legacy solutions for a digital problem. I sold them a future. It wasn't a difficult choice for Mr. Davies to make. And Innovatech, he sputtered. Priya Sharma, she's a difficult woman. Impossible to please. Priya Sharma is a brilliant technologist who was tired of being patronized by a man who couldn't tell a server from a search engine. I said, my voice turning colder. She wasn't difficult. You were just incompetent in her field. I listened to her. That's all. It was remarkably simple. He flinched as if I had struck him. The word incompetent was a blow he couldn't parry. His entire identity was built on the foundation of his own supposed genius. This is unethical, he stammered, falling back on the last refuge of a man who has lost the argument. You used proprietary information. The only proprietary information I used, Mr. Harrison, was my own intellect. An asset you owned on paper but never bothered to unwrap. Everything I did after I left your firm. I built a better service, and your clients, who are free to choose whomever they wish, chose me. It's called the free market. I believe you're a great admirer of its principles. The finality in my voice, the complete absence of fear or deference, seemed to break him. He sank into one of the visitors' chairs opposite my desk, a puppet with its strings cut. He looked old. He looked defeated. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Was it revenge? I considered the question. For months, in the furnace of my departure, revenge had been the fuel. I had fantasized about this moment, about seeing him humbled. But now that it was here, it felt different. The victory wasn't in his defeat. The victory was in the room around me, in the sound of my team collaborating outside, in the contract with Sterling Corp sitting on my desk. The victory was mine, and it was utterly independent of him. He was just a catalyst, an obstacle that had forced me to find a new path. I'll admit, the thought of you losing those clients wasn't unpleasant, I said, allowing myself a small, honest smile. But no, this wasn't about you. Not really. You didn't build this company, Mr. Harrison. Your sexism did. Your condescension did. Your profound underestimation of the woman who made your coffee every morning for 5 years. You created a box for me labeled women's work. You left me no choice but to build my own world outside of it, because you made it abundantly clear there was no room for me in yours. I leaned forward, my tone dropping to a confidential, almost intimate level. So, in a way, I suppose I should thank you. You were a terrible boss, but you were a magnificent motivator. He said nothing. He just stared at his hands, which were trembling slightly. He had come here expecting a fight, a negotiation, a tearful confession. He was unprepared for this calm, this control, for this clarity. After a long final silence, he stood up. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. He walked to the door, his steps heavy, the confident stride of the predator replaced by the shuffle of the obsolete. He opened the door, and just before he stepped out, he paused. The coffee, he said, his back still to me. It really was very good. And then he was gone. I sat there for a long time after he left, the silence of my office a comfortable blanket. His final words hung in the air. It was the only compliment he had ever given me, and it was for the one task that represented my subjugation. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost poetic. He still didn't get it. He never would. He would go to his grave believing he was a great man undone by a vindictive subordinate, never understanding that he was simply a dinosaur who couldn't see the meteor coming. I looked out the window at the sprawling city. It looked different from up here. The path I had seen from his office window all those years ago had been a straight, narrow line on a map he controlled. The view from my window showed 1,000 possible paths, a web of opportunities stretching to the horizon. My journey wasn't born from a desire for revenge. Not truly. Revenge is a finite, corrosive fuel. It burns hot and leaves you with nothing but ash. What drove me, what sustained me through the fear and the uncertainty, was something more enduring. It was the relentless, undeniable need to be seen. To have my work, my mind, my value acknowledged. I didn't tear down his house because I hated him. I built my own house because I deserved to live in a place where I belonged. The fact that his house fell into shadow as mine rose was simply a consequence of the architecture. The intercom buzzed again, startling me from my thoughts. It was Chloe. Ilara? Mr. Davies from Sterling Corp is on line 1. He wants to talk about expanding the Q3 campaign. I smiled. A real genuine smile that reached my eyes. I picked up the receiver, my past a ghost, my future a blueprint. Put him through, Chloe, I said. Let's get to work. And so, my story isn't really about a bad boss. It's about the boxes we are put into, and the quiet revolutionary power of refusing to stay there. It's about realizing that the work others deem beneath you can sometimes provide you with the very tools you need to surpass them. My boss thought he was defining my work, but all he was really doing was revealing his own limitations. It makes me wonder about the moments in our own lives that seem like humiliations, but are in fact pivot points in disguise. Was it revenge that drove me? Or was it something else entirely? And have you ever had a moment, a comment, a task, that so completely and unexpectedly redefined your path? I would love to read your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to her revenge arc. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories like this one. Until next time.